And it really doesn't matter because we say Chiefs Kingdom and everybody knows what we talk about. Hey, what's up, everybody? We are live. Welcome
Chiefs
to
Kingdom,
another episode.
Chiefs Kingdom.
That's right. We're not going to talk about the AFC Championship. So welcome to another episode of Live here on Keystroke Medium. I am Josh Hayes, here as always with my co-host and friend Scott Moon. Tonight we are joined by the best-selling author Marc Alan Edelheit.
Marc.
And we are going to we are going to talk about his
how many times have I been on?
Steiger's Tigers series. J.R. Hanley says howdy is my favorite author.
Hey, J.R.
Everybody in the live chat, welcome. On the shenanigans they're talking about Lieutenant Commander Data's daughter. I'm not even sure what's going on in the live chat right now, but
that's what happens when we're 2 minutes late to start.
Mouse pads.
Yes. Oh, that's right. And since I think I showed it off the last time.
Scott just showed his off. So.
I know.
You can.
I'm gonna have it sewn onto a leather jacket and wear it on a motorcycle.
Actually, we're actually.
Did you say these were like limited editions the last
time?
They
were. Yeah. We gave away the last of them at DragonCon this year, and we're actually looking at creating a T-shirt, and so it's to give away, which will be kind of cool.
That will be.
I love T-shirts.
Maybe mugs, like coffee mugs. But
we did coffee mugs for Keystroke.
Nice
stickers.
And how do we get one of those?
We've got them for sale on the website,
cool.
And I'll hook you up with it. But for everybody that's in the live chat, if you guys have not heard one of our famous Marc interviews.
Legendary. I think it's
these are legendary.
These are like one of the few people I actually grant interviews to. So congratulations!
Yes, we're winning.
Help your Chiefs fan.
That's right. It's funny when you text me like right when they were going to the AFC and we were talking about scheduling the show and we're like, yes, AFC, and then the next day we like didn't talk to each other at all. Like it was the worst thing ever. So Kayleen says you were on in season 1 episode 27 and season 3 episode 27. I think we've screwed it up because I think we're on episode 9 tonight. Season 4.
We could always call it episode 27 regardless.
We'll breaking the mold.
Yeah. So I think you're right up there with the most amount of recurring guest spots. So congratulations for that, first of all.
Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about the Fortress of Radiance, which is your latest book in your Steiger's Tigers kind of universe. And you have your main universe and then your couple of offshoots. And we'll talk about the reasons behind that here in a little while. But for maybe people who are just joining the podcast or the video feed that don't know anything about you, why don't you give us a little bit about Marc?
Okay, well, my name's Marc Alan Edelheit, and I've been published since March of 2015. I have 8 books out. Come 5/1, I'll have 9 books out, and 6/1, 10 books, and 7/1, 11 books.
I'm sensing a trend.
Yes, and as of January 1st last year, I was able to take writing full time. Before that, I was an executive. I was president of a health insurance company. And writing had always been one of my passions. And it's thankfully, I've been able to really follow my dream and do something that I enjoy that allows me to work from home, spend more time with my family, and really turn out quality work that, it still doesn't seem real to me. Like this past year, I was on a panel at DragonCon. And there was Janny Works was on there. I don't know if you know her. She's a phenomenal author. I actually grew up reading her books. Mm-hmm. I almost brought one of her books to get it signed. Jody Lanai was on the panel. S.M. Sterling. My wife said no on that. John Ringo and David Weber was on the panel. And it was like, I'm sitting on this panel and there's like 600 people in the room. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, this isn't real. It's like, I don't belong up here. And then one of them leaned over to me and said, when I was your age, I didn't feel I belonged here either. It was like she could read my mind.
Right.
And it was like, and she's like, you're right where you need to be. And it's still just not real to me that, I've got, we just did, we had to put together a pitch packet because we've got a lot of interest in film recently. And I expect in the next few weeks to be able to make an announcement that my main series has been optioned and is going to be made into a series. But we're putting all the statistics together. And my agent was like, do you realize that you've done 60 million page reads on Kindle Unlimited alone and over 300,000 direct sales? And you know, I was aware of those numbers, but it just still, it doesn't seem real to me. And R.A. Salvatore, I saw him, I think it was him, he went ahead and he put the end on his book and made a post on Facebook where he's like, every time I put the end on a book, and he sold like 30 million books, he's like, I feel like, you know, they're going to catch on to me, like I'm a fraud. And I had the same feeling. And I wasn't, I didn't realize that it was like all these other authors have those same kind of feelings, that it's still, for him and other people like him, it doesn't seem real. And I compared notes with other authors at some of these conventions, big authors, and they're like, yeah, it's just not real. It's like I write for me, and then other people like it, and it's, you know, it's one of those things.
I've been dealing a lot about that kind of the imposter syndrome, but also this, like, because I just recently went full time as well, and so it's like,
congratulations! I saw that and I offered you congratulations on Facebook.
Yes, thank you very much. You know, it's you sit here and you're like, okay, now I'm getting paid to do this, and it does, like you say, it doesn't feel real because this is just something. It's fun. It's like playing a game all day long, and you get paid for it, and people expect you to produce, and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea what I'm doing, but here, you can have some of this.
I remember when we met for coffee that one day, you just turned in your papers, and I said, well, I'm downtown, man. Let's go meet at Reverie and have some coffee. And you're like, I got to get used to this. Is my day. I can plan this to do this, this, and this. And I was like, that's pretty awesome. I want to do that.
It's crazy because when you go full time, you lose track of the days.
Yep.
Yeah. Today was Monday. We had a big snowstorm here. And I lost track of days. And I was like, oh, shoot, it's time to bring out the trash. It's like being retired. And, you know, when I meet people at parties or get-togethers or gatherings, they're like, what's it like to be an author? And I'm like, well, you know, it's a lot of fun, but it's like being retired. And they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah, it's like I work half days. And they're like, oh, wow, I wish I could work half days. And I'm like, 12 hours a day, every day.
Right.
Right. I should have seen that coming.
Yeah. And it's true because, you know, to deliver a quality book, and you guys know this because you're both authors, it takes a lot of effort, time, and energy just to get that book out there. And the sad thing is that we create these wonderful worlds, and then we want to go play in them, and you can't.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
it's fun stuff. And honestly, you know, my daughter had a career day at her school the other day, in middle school, and I went, and one of my friends is a director, and he went too. And we had another friend who went as well, and he sold like he's a professor at a college, and he said, I'm never going after you two again in career day.
Yeah. And it wasn't one of those things where you're like, my dad's an author, and everybody's like, but what's his real job?
Yeah.
Like, what's he really do?
No, it's like I got in there and I'm like, and I used to be a middle school principal, and I used to teach first, second, and third, and fifth through eighth in a different life. And I get in there and I'm like, my first words out of my mouth is, I've got the best job in the world. And then I talk about it. And then I tell them, my best job isn't really, because I do a lot of motivational speaking too, isn't what your best job could be. And you guys are in middle school, and you need to start thinking about what you're going to do. And, you know, the reality is for years when I ran a health insurance company, I had people that loved their jobs and other people that didn't love their jobs, and they were miserable at what they were doing. And my thoughts on that is life is too short to do something that you really dislike doing.
Yep.
If you have a passion to do something, do it. And a lot of people are afraid of making a change in life. And, you know, whatever that passion is, try to do it. Because if you can do it and you can make it into a full-time job, it's not work. And Josh, you know what I'm talking about.
It was so hard to convince my finance guy when I rolled my retirement from the police department over to my finance guy. He was like, "All right, I need to line up all these things. And when do you want to retire? A lot of people say 65, but is that good for you? When do you want to retire?" And I'm like, I don't.
How about right now?
I don't. Well, the thing was, like, I don't want to retire. Like, I don't have a reason to retire. I could do this until I fall over dead. Like, I don't need a number where I can retire. And it wasn't clicking for him. He's like, "Yeah, but I need a date." I'm like, "Okay, put 65 down, but I'm not going to retire at 65."
Yeah.
Because I'm already doing what I want to do. So.
Yeah, you know, when you're at the conventions, you meet people like Eric Flint, you meet David Weber, and these authors who've just been writing forever, and they love what they do, and when you're a writer, I mean, you can write in your 80s, 90s, or whenever you keel over. So it's.
Oh, we've had David Weber on the show twice now, and it's amazing to me how hyped up he still gets about writing, because I mean, he's been writing for what, 20, 25, 30
since I was a teenager, and I read that first Honor Harrington series.
Exactly. Yeah. And you talk to him, and he's as he's excited about writing now as he probably more so than he was back in the day.
Yeah.
And so it's cool to see, you know, like you say, you're working a 9 to 5 or whatever, and it's not your dream passion and you want to do something else, but the amount of interest and excitement you have about doing something that you're passionate about really kind of changes your outlook on life. I think that's really neat.
It does. And you know, for me, writing allows me to spend more time with my family, and I get to go to events now with my kids where before I couldn't go because I had to travel the country, or I had to be at this meeting or that meeting. And it's kind of neat. And it's also a different experience, because before I used to go to work in a suit and a tie. Now I go to work in PJs. I take the kids to the curb and I'm sitting here. And the one thing that I actually miss about working at a job is, you know, I have people I work with now. I have my editors, I have my beta readers, I have my agent. And sadly, everything we send is primarily email. My agent and I talk about once a week, but I used to work with people before, where I really enjoyed working with them. And now my workspace is kind of isolated. Right. So I don't have that same interaction. So really, excuse me, that's what I miss most about working a regular job, is that I'm not working with people. I'm working on my own. And
I have ups and downs with people that I work with. Some of my people are more fun to work with than others.
Yes. You know, when I was a special ed teacher, I used to work with the seriously emotionally disturbed. So you actually really liked that job, because
that'd be a good job.
It was, because they're kids, and you never knew what you were going to come into, and every day was a different day. And it was actually quite rewarding. You know, at the time I was, I had this great, it was in New Hampshire, and I had this classroom that was an old home ec classroom, half home ec, half kitchen, half regular. So we used to cook for the kids, because a lot of the kids were on the lowest socioeconomic ladder, that rung, the bottom rung, and they would come to school and their parents didn't feed them or whatever. So we'd cook meals and stuff like that for them, and teach them how to cook. And at the time I was going for my master's degree as a reading writing specialist. So I suddenly looked around at my kids and I'm like, holy cow, this is middle school, and over 90% of my kids can't read and write. So I'm going through all this education stuff on reading and writing. So I started teaching them reading and writing. And you really don't know what an effect you have upon people until something smacks you in the face. And I remember parent conferences. I was going for my master's program. I was doing classes at night. I was exhausted. I was tired. I was at the end of the day, we had parent conferences, and I hadn't slept very well the night before, because I just had all these projects due, and I had my regular classwork, and I had the meetings with the IEPs I had to draft up and stuff like that. And we had these parent conferences, and the last parent conference was this 8th grade, and the father came in, and I just wanted it over with, and I wanted to go home. And the father sat down, and the kid got up and walked over to the bookshelf, and he brought over a book, and he wanted to read it. And I'm like, oh God, I just want to go to bed. And it was like a, Dick does this kind of book, it was very simple. And he started reading it to his father.
It's kind of like the book Scott's writes.
Yeah, it's pretty much. And well, it's what I read what I write. I mean, I write what I read. I mean, that's my reading level.
Exactly. But I look up suddenly, and it's Dick does this, or Jane does this, that kind of book. And I suddenly see tears rolling down the father's face. And I found out later, in the meeting, that his son was the first one in the family that could read.
Oh, wow.
And it blew me away. And you don't know what an effect you have on people. So Scott, when you're working with the people you work with, you never know.
Oh, well, yeah. I was the
they all may be good.
Yeah, sometimes the people in the live chat are talking about their different jobs as you're talking your story, and my comment in there,
live chat.
My live chat was I don't like fighting naked meth heads in the snow, and they're like trying to cheer me up and explain to me that it could be okay. I'm like, no, it's really not. It's really never good.
It's not all it's cracked up.
It's wear gloves at that point.
You're right. Gloves are good and stuff. Yeah, but sometimes you do have somebody that you come back like me and my partner from like 20 years ago. He called me a couple years ago. He's like, hey, you remember so-and-so? I'm like, no, I don't remember who that was. He goes, well, that lady we arrested her. She's a girl back then. And we give her a come to Jesus speech, like the thousands that we give out all the time. And she had like 5 years after that had come back and told him how it changed her life. And she got clean. She got her kids back and had a job and all this stuff. And I had moved on to a different part of the department. And so you do get those wins, but statistically, where Josh worked and where I'm still at, you're talking like 1 in 1,000 are those types of happy endings. So it gets discouraging.
It's that one.
Oh yeah, it's really powerful.
It makes it all worth it. Because you never know. You change one life. I don't care what it is. All right, how you do it. You've done a good deed. I had a beta reader that. He became a beta reader after he sent me the email, and he's who knew we had troops in Chad, but he went ahead and he said, he wrote.
We have troops in Chad.
In Chad, yeah. He's like, your books got me through a really hot and unsanitary deployment in Chad, and we started talking back and forth, and I invited him to become a beta reader. But I actually get a lot of people that write me. Particularly after like a book like Fort Covenant, where they talk about like the book is about at the end of the book they have this fort that they're defending and it's getting overrun, and I get emails from people that have been in Afghanistan and stuff or in Vietnam and say, I was in a fire base and it was overrun and it was just like that, and you don't know. And it's like, thank you for writing that. Or, my character, Steiger, he suffers from PTSD. I don't say it in the book because it's in kind of like Roman fantasy times.
Right.
But there are points in the book where he runs hot, points where he runs cold. He's been affected. I don't care if you've been in combat, whoever you are, you don't have to be in combat to have PTSD. But there's so many people today that just don't talk about the effects of what people experience have upon them. And I think it's important to write about and talk about, because if you don't talk about it, it never gets solved or it never gets addressed.
So that brings up an interesting question for me. And like, for instance, you've never served in the Roman Legion.
No.
I never did any combat tours in Afghanistan.
You didn't serve in Space Force?
Right.
I see
Space Force. No.
Behind you.
Oh, I have a Space Command ID card because I was in Space Command. It's completely different than Space Force, but I was in Space Command.
Nice.
But I have never served in a combat deployment, and I wrote a novel, Striker's War, for the Galaxy's Edge series, where there's several deployed combat situations, and I had a guy send me an email, and he read the end of it, and the end of it, there's a ceremony that happens, and he said, I've sat through so many of these ceremonies that I almost couldn't read what you wrote because it hit me. And he said a couple of the scenes that you wrote were like spot on, like exactly the way I would have pictured them. Which I've never been in a situation like that, so I felt as a win. Yes, like I'm really glad that it pulled off that way. But for you, like having people come to you in that situation, like what do you put into that scene where if your fort gets overrun and you're having that battle, like what energy, what research goes into that scene where you're developing that to have
A
that
lot of
emotional impact?
research. A lot of research goes into it. The thing with Roman legions is that there has not been a situation where anyone in modern times has envisioned the battle with 10 to 20,000 people on the size of a football field. Okay. Even the Roman historians didn't describe what that scene was like. You know, they would paint it in broad brush strokes. You know, the field ran red, that kind of stuff. The reason they didn't talk about what it was like to be on the field with that kind of battle was because the people that they were writing for at that time were the people that served. So they didn't need to talk about doing serial killer shit on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And so you do as much research as you can, and then you try to fill in the gaps. Like we know how the Romans trained, okay? And that's what makes it, for me, when I chose the Roman, you read a lot of fantasy where people write about medieval times, but you don't read a lot of fantasy about where people talk about Roman times. Now, we know a lot about how the Romans lived, how they thought, how they acted, how they trained, and how they fought, okay? There was a saying that the difference between training with a Roman legion and real battle was the effusion of blood, okay? So you try to go ahead and take it to that next step. Historians today don't know what an ancient battle that the Romans fought actually was like on the ground. They have to draw inferences from what we know. Now, we do know, you would assume that when you have two armies come together, that there would be a lot of killing at that moment. There isn't. It's when one side breaks that the real killing begins.
Right.
Okay. But
it's a lot of pushing and shoving and
exactly
in you know, like a rugby scrum, except like with more swords and a lot more people.
Yeah, sharp objects.
Yeah.
So, you know, but the battles were very deadly, and you know, when one side broke was when the real killing began. But from doing a research perspective, I'm a student of history. I'm the ultimate fan of history. I read constantly. And I used to have a history podcast called 2 Cent History that I no longer have anymore, that I used to talk about ancient battles. I used to talk about different things. I did an episode on the Battle of Britain. And I was actually going to tell the story of the Battle of Britain, but then it occurred to me, what was it actually like to be in a cockpit of a fighter during World War II? And I couldn't find really anything on that. So then I said, well, you know, there's still some veterans alive. Why don't I talk to them? And I started I got in touch with the British Fighter Association. I got in touch with, there's a German association where German Luftwaffe pilots flew. And I started interviewing those pilots. And it really opened up what it was like for them to be in the air and the terror that they felt. Later in the war, when you go up, I interviewed this one wonderful guy, and I just talked about him on a Facebook live episode, Bob Punchy Powell. He was an ace in the 352nd Fighter Group. He's a wonderful guy. I went down to Atlanta to meet him. You couldn't ask for a more entertaining person. And, you know, he told me that, and he was an ace, right? And he told me that later in the war, and he was one of the few Americans in the Spitfire Association, because he flew Spitfires in combat. Because when he got over to Europe, there weren't enough P-47s for him, so he got stuck in the Spitfire. But he told me that later in the war, dogfights were the rarity. That when you went up, whoever spotted whoever first usually killed that guy, right? However, the guys in the Battle of Britain knew that every time they went up, they were going into a dogfight. And I interviewed this guy named Jeffrey Wellham, who they made a movie about. I think Ewan McGregor starred in it. He was an ace, I think, by 18, and by 19, he had a nervous breakdown.
Oh, wow.
And every time he went up, he knew he was going to get in a dogfight, and there was a very strong chance he was going to die. And I asked him, because he told me in the beginning, he's like, when we were trained to fly, we weren't allowed to do aerial aerobatics. And we didn't know if we were going to be good fighter pilots until we got into combat. And I was like, why didn't you guys train like that? He goes, well, they never thought that the Germans fighters would be able to come over Britain. Never thought that France would fall. And he's like, and they didn't allow us to train like that because the station commanders, who weren't pilots, didn't like dirty airplanes, and the airplanes leaked oil. And when you did the fancy aerobatic,
nice.
It would leak oil all over the place. So they didn't know. And I was like, well, what was it that kept you alive? Was it like experience? What was it? Because you read a lot about that, where you hear the combat veterans. It's the newbies that always get it. And his response was, well, it was kind of random. And you got it. And it was just like, it was like you just, and one of the things he told me, and I've heard this from other combat veterans too, was that there's a lot of fear going into combat, but I think it was him that told me, maybe it was Townsend, but it was, if you go into combat, right, if you accept you're already going to die, you're going to perform better.
Right.
And Jeff told me this story, and it brought the hairs on my neck, the hands on my arm. And he was like, his first time up in combat, they flew the Finger 3, which wasn't a very good formation. It was one plane in front and two on the sides. And they were vectored. He was one of the wingmen, and they were being vectored up to go into combat. And he had to pay attention to the lead, because they were flying so close that if he wasn't paying attention, he could hit him. And the lead is the one who's basically following the directions of the ground controller where they need to go. And they call bandits on the radio. The Germans called them Indians. And he looks up, and he's at like 20,000 feet and 25,000 feet. For the first time he looks up, he's just been focused on not hitting the plane next to him and staying with his flight leader. And he sees in the distance what looks like a cloud of insects. And then behind it, another cloud, and then another cloud. And he realizes that they're German bombers coming in to bomb. Oh, wow. And then he looks down, and they're German bombers below him. It's the first time he looked up. And his flight lead orders the attack. And they were told, and this was the first time in combat, I think it was 17, was that when you dive down, you're to put what you call a squirt into the aircraft and then turn away and run. Because if you stay there, they're German fighters, they're going to come after you. So he comes down on a Heinkel 111, puts a squirt into it. And he said there was something that was really undefined, that the minute you hit it, you knew the aircraft was dead, but it would be flying normally. And he said that he put a squirt into it, and the aircraft flew normally, but he knew it was doomed. And he didn't dive away. He just stayed there following it, and suddenly he saw a glow inside the aircraft. And this is his first time in combat, and it was on fire inside. And the crew started to bail out, and the bomber started to go over. And he said the last guy out pulled his chute too soon, and it caught on the tail. And he followed that aircraft into the ground. And he said to this day, and he's in his 90s now, said to this day he can recall the smell of the aircraft at that moment, the taste of the fuel in his mouth, and the sound. And he remembers thinking, is God allowing this to happen at that moment?
Wow.
And that's really a visual moment. As a writer, you try to understand that. that I've never been in that. And if I ever write a book about it, it's something that I want to capture. But it was such a powerful moment for him that it haunted him for the rest of his life. And he knew at that moment that he was a killer.
I think
about that.
I think that quite possibly could be the most powerful story that's ever been told on
Keystroke Medium.
I don't even know how to follow that up.
Yeah.
That's insane. Like, just wow.
It's amazing. Yeah. But talking to those people, you know, and getting their stories like that, I mean, it's got to affect you as a writer, and give you not only material to use, but the way they deliver it effectively. Because not, you know, like you talk to some people that have been in situations like that, and some of them tell the story better than others. And people with natural skill and oration can really bring it to life and kind of put you in the scene and give you the chills, goosebumps.
And it does. And I've interviewed a number of combat veterans. I come from a military family myself. My uncle served in Korea. I had relatives serve in the Civil War and the Revolution. I didn't have anyone serve in World War II. They worked in factories and stuff like that. To my knowledge, you never know. But you know, like when I was growing up, I remember talking to my uncle who was I think he was in the 1st Marine Division in Korea. And he told me when I was a kid, we were talking about tanks, and I was like, tanks would really be cool to drive. And his response to that, yeah, I know, it would. His response to that is tanks draw a lot of fire.
Yeah.
As a kid, I didn't really understand what that meant. Older, I've done research on it. I've talked to a few tankers, and man, they draw a lot of fire. And it's one of those things where you think that you would be in a tank and you'd be protected. And I've spoken with a number of World War II veterans who were in Shermans, and they were fighting against German PZ-4s and Tigers and Panthers and stuff like that. And they told me they were absolutely terrified that they couldn't sleep at night because they knew that the next morning, when they learned they were going to attack before dawn, they realized that they could be killed. And it's one of those things where you just have to realize how grateful you are that these people lived before you that went through this to ensure our freedom today. But at the same time, from a writing perspective, you look at these experiences people had, and they're not too dissimilar from experiences people had in Roman times, right?
Yeah, different weapon, but same result, same risk,
same terror.
Same terror, yeah.
I read somewhere that I don't remember the book, but it was about the Roman legions, and a historian, somebody made a comment that the Roman legionaries never were more religious than before a battle. Think about that for a second. And is that not true for a lot of people that go into combat? And it's those things as a writer that you can take and you can put into your books, because human experience is so similar. It's just different equipment, different machines. You know, there are historians that talk about before ancient battle that men basically shat themselves right before the battle in the line, or their teeth were chattering so hard that sometimes they broke their teeth. Think about that. Now
that's a really like a visceral thing that you can put into, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Now think about this for a second. So the Roman legionaries were terrified of their centurions, and the centurions were basically promoted because of their aggressive attitude.
Their motivational attitude.
Yes, exactly. Like they were the guys that were always front, always in the action, and always setting the example. And as a result, the centurions always had the highest casualty rate. So the Roman legionaries were terrified of these guys, and they carried these vine canes that were these wonderful twisted vine canes that were very thick. And it was an office of their badge where basically they were allowed to carry that by the Roman emperor that gave them a measure of imperium. And the measure was the right to strike another Roman citizen. And they had a Roman centurion that we don't know his name today, but we only know him by his nickname, which is Bring Me Another. Because what he did was he took the big vine cane and would break it over the back of his men. And then when it would break, he would say, "Bring me another."
Bring me
right?
another.
That's how we know him today. But think about that for a second. So the idea was not only were these centurions looked up to, but they were feared to the point where and the Roman punishments were horrendous for cowardice and whatever. So if you're going into combat and you fear your centurion more than the enemy, okay, how better are you going to perform? It's just really interesting dynamic from a writing perspective that you can look at. And at the same time, you had these guys that were absolutely feared, but also loved by their men because they knew that these guys were, and sure, there are bad officers and they're good officers, but they knew that these guys were going to take risks and they were going to ask them to do things that they weren't afraid to do themselves. It's the U.S. military kind of thing, lead by example. Same thing.
Which I think,
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, which I think you've done really well with the character of Steiger. You've created a character there where, in that type of situation, like he is that centurion type character. But that he's the one that the people look up to, and he's also got the very like the logistical and the strategical outlook for really kind of pushing his men through. And I want to talk a little bit about that, and then kind of how Steiger's kind of breaks off into this other two series. Right before we do that, though, I want to talk about our show sponsor tonight.
Sure.
And then we can delve into that. So our show sponsor tonight is Hope Is Not a Strategy. It's a 4 Horsemen anthology by Chris Kennedy and Marc Wandry, of which Scott and I are a part of, and several other authors that.
And I've met Chris Kennedy. He's a hell of an author.
Yes, we've had him on the show several times. Very awesome guy.
Hung out with him in Vegas.
He hung out with him in Vegas.
He may or may not have witnessed some face burning.
I don't even know what you're talking about. So we have in this anthology, Chris Kennedy, Jonathan Brazee, Craig Martell, Kevin Stevenson, Terry Mixon, me, Scott, Chris Fox, Marc Wandry, Kevin McLaughlin, Brian Niemeyer, Nathan Heisted, Robert Hampston, Amy Duboff, and Casey Azell. This collection is phenomenal. It's the second time that Scott and I have been able to basically collab on a short story.
Yeah, it was fun.
The first time we did it, the stories kind of did this and intermingled. This time when we did it, if you read mine first and then read Scott's second, they follow each other, but they tell a more complete story. If you read them together, they're standalone by themselves, but read together, they.
What's the name of the book again?
Hope Is Not a Strategy.
So for everybody watching the interview, go out and get the book.
That's right.
Thanks.
What I love about this show, guys, is that it's done by authors, and and you guys understand it's one of the few interviews I actually do, and I really enjoy doing, because you guys know what it's like to be there on the front line and actually write books. So.
It's it's fun to do the short story collections and do the different collaborations, and maybe that's something we can talk about here in the second half. Really quick though, this anthology it's the 8th book in the 4 Horsemen Tales series, but I think they've got 16 or 20 books out now.
Yeah, there's a bunch.
Crazy, isn't it?
And he's just slamming them out. So really, really, really good collection. Please go and pick it up. Support Chris Kennedy and his 4 Horsemen universe, and also read Scott and I's story, and then tell us how great of writers we are. We always love that.
Yeah, and remember what your mom said. You can't say something nice. Don't say anything at all.
Don't say anything at all. Right.
Yeah, Bambi's rule.
Right. There you go. Right. Don't make Josh start yelling to bring him another.
That's right. Bring me another one.
Right, bring me another.
Think about that guy. How terrified would you be of him?
Oh yeah.
It's like you're gonna hold the line. You know,
I'm gonna go get one of those things and just hold it while we're having an episode, and I'll just hold it like right here and be like, "Come on, say something, say something."
I actually held a binding game once, and I looked at it, and I was like, "Holy cow! This thing! I would not want to be hit with this thing. It's like a baseball bat, but all twisty and stuff. You can go online and look at them, and it's just one of those crazy things that that stay with us today in history. And you look back at them, and you're like, you know, they had their traditions, they had everything, and you begin to understand what it was like to serve in those legions back in the day. And it's just so cool. As a writer, it's cool because you can bring it alive again for people, and it hasn't been around for 1,000-2,000 years.
One of the things that, like I said, really strikes me about Steiger is it's probably a bad analogy, but it's the only analogy I can make. But he is like the gladiator, the Maximus Decimus Meridius character, where he can basically take any situation, form the people around him that he needs to have around him, and then succeed in that situation.
Yeah.
And he can do it through respect, but he can also do it through proving that he's a better fighter without kicking your ass, without taking that tool and instrument and breaking it over your back. He can do it without ever doing that. He can probably do it without ever touching you. So you have that main series, and then you have the shoot off series, the offshoot,
the Kara Saga and Tales of the
Seven. The Kara Saga. So tell us about. We've talked about Tiger extensively on the show before. Tell us a little bit about the Kara Saga and kind of how that came about.
So the Kara Saga, I for a long while wanted to. My real passion is military science fiction. Okay, I'm stuck in fantasy at the moment. I can't get out of it.
Let me just say that is a weird misnomer. It's a weird thing, because being stuck in fantasy doesn't ever happen. Like that, it doesn't usually happen.
Fantasy is a tough market for
right. Usually it happens.
Yeah.
Usually it happens the opposite.
I've been trying to write a science fiction book for 3 years now, and I just can't get it done because the fantasy is so successful. I'm working on it this year. I've got it. It'll be out this year.
I'm completely the opposite. I would much rather write epic fantasy, but I say stuck in most sci-fi. I'm doing very well in most sci-fi. I love most sci-fi, but I would love to get in the epic fantasy. And so it's interesting to hear someone say it reverse.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. And at the same time, I also like historical fiction, right? So I want to write a book on the Civil War. Okay. I've done, we took a trip this year, a road trip to Florida, and we hit like 6 or 7 battlefields along the way. My wife is awesome. In fact, the first battlefield we hit, I didn't tell her, my wife's Colombian, and her name before we got married was Bolivar. So we hit the Bolivar Heights battlefield in Harper. And I was like,
nice.
Maybe just out of the blue, you know? It's like,
that's interesting.
How did that happen? That's weird.
Didn't see that coming at all.
Didn't see that coming. But it was a cool battlefield, right? So it was like they had a Union position at the beginning of the war on this mountaintop. And then Stonewall Jackson comes along, and there's another mountaintop across the region. He puts cannon. It's higher. And anyway, so the Union, they lost like 14,000 men in this battle, or whatever it is. But what was really cool there was they had actual artillery pieces from 1862, and the elevation controls still worked. They're very well maintained. But so we did a lot of research on it. And the Kara Saga actually was my first attempt at historical fiction, because the Lost Legion 9 was half historical fiction, half fantasy. And it takes place with, it follows one of the greatest historical mysteries ever, which is what happened to the 9th Roman Legion. And because one minute it was guarding Rome's northern border in Britannia,
right,
and the next minute it was gone. right? Around 122 AD, it disappeared. There's a lot of theories about it. There, like some people think it went to Nijmegen and then was disbanded. Other people think it went to Judea and was disbanded. But there's no real firm historical evidence. When Lost Legion 9 published, the month before it published, Doctor Who came out with an episode on the 9th Roman Legion, and I was like, really?
Yeah,
nice.
2 years on this book, really now? But it just disappeared. And what I did was I did a tremendous amount of research on the 9th Roman Legion. And half of the book is historical fiction, half is fantasy. And in my book, it's the 9th Roman Legion is abducted and taken to a different world. But telling the tale of what happened to the 9th, I had to actually go into the weeds, The 9th was based at a town called Aboracum, which is now modern day York. Well, what was it like back then? What was it like to be a centurion with the legion, go through the routine? What did they eat? There's a fascinating scene in the beginning of the book. I think it's fascinating anyway, where basically Karis and this other character named Dio are having breakfast together before the legion is awoken, rousted out of their beds, and they're in the officer mess. And Karis goes ahead and gets this wonderful sauce called garum, and he just pours it liberally. It was this. The Romans felt that garum. A lot of Romans felt that garum made everything taste better, right?
So
garum. You know what it is?
Like ketchup.
Like ketchup, exactly. Like Patrick Mahomes with his ketchup.
That's right. That's right. That's
salsa.
Right.
It's salsa.
Yeah, exactly. But this was like fermented fish juice.
Oh yeah, that sounds.
I don't like that. No,
yeah, it smelled just plain awful. And to this day, archaeologists, they can dig up pottery and pick it up and smell it and tell if there's garum inside. Okay, 2,000 years later. So and I have this wonderful scene where Karis is pouring garum out and Dio is taking honey and to dip his bread in. And it's just that mundane moment that you can bring back to life, what it was like back then, or talk about cats. A lot of people don't realize that cats were imported all over Europe because of the Roman legions.
Yeah.
And I've talked to a number of vets about this who've served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and rats are just awful. Like the black rat was the Roman legionaries' nemesis. If you're sleeping in a tent at night and there are rats out there, your exposed fingers and toes can get bitten by a rat, or your ears. And it feels like knives, somebody cutting you with knives because they have sharp teeth. So what was the reason, it was one of the reasons why the Roman legions imported cats everywhere, but it was also that the rodents used to eat and chew incessantly. So if you have armor, there's leather straps and leather equipment under the armor that the rodents would chew. And the Roman legionaries were responsible for maintaining their own kit. So if you had a rat go ahead and chew through a strap, you got to pay for that. But also they ate through food stores. So you had all these Roman legions. And historians today believe that there wasn't a cohort, there wasn't a century of men that didn't adopt the cat and take care of it, because there were a number of reasons for that. It was keeping the disease down. It was keeping them from chewing leather, keeping them from eating food stores. But at the same time, the legionaries looked at the cats and said, they're good hunters, and we're good hunters, and they identified with them. There was even a Praetorian cohort nicknamed the Catty, and their symbol was a cat because they adopted the cat. That and the grapes. Wherever the Romans legions went, they
cat grapes.
They did, because the Roman legionaries had I think it was a 1 or 2 liter ration a day of wine. And
it was safer to drink than water. I'm assuming with alcohol would be safe to get dysentery.
Well, it wasn't exactly safe because you could still get bacteria in there, right?
Right.
better than drinking the water. And the Roman legions, wherever they went, they were about sanitation. You know, if you're standing upriver, you don't pee in the river. And downriver. You know?
Unless you're a real
doing
asshole.
wrong. This whole time, that's what I've been doing wrong.
It's a rule. But
Yeah.
they were big about sanitation. The legionaries had to bathe regularly. They understood that there was a correlation between uncleanliness and disease. And it's one of the reasons why in Roman cities you see all the fountains. Like, have you guys ever been to Rome?
I have been to Italy. I don't know that I've ever been to Rome.
You ever seen a public fountain going back to the Roman days?
They're the big ones that you step in, right?
Or you see like the reason the fountains were there was not decorative. It was so that the locals could draw fresh water from it. It was all aqueduct fed. So they would put a fountain there. They would have a basin around it, which was a pool, and you would come or send your slave with buckets or jars to go ahead and draw water and bring it back to the
Scott. Go get my water.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
That is if you didn't have running water in your home, and if you were wealthy enough, the aqueduct, you would have running water in your home. And I went to Israel once, which was an amazing place, and we went to a Greek city, and there was a public bathroom that we saw 2,000 years ago. It was a public bathroom, and it was really cool. It had all these like stones coming out where you would sit, and it would be like 2 stones here, and you would sit on it. Each cheek would rest on a stone. You'd do your business, and there was a trench beneath your feet, and running water would carry away the waste. I mean,
was that the 3 seashells place, or did they?
No, not the 3 seashells. That's a good movie, though.
It's definitely
That's a great movie. What the hell was that called?
You may be onto something. I think
Demolition Man.
Demolition Man with Wesley Snipes, and that was a great movie.
Oh, it's fantastic. The greatest thing I think about that whole thing is they never explained the 3. They never anywhere did they ever.
You didn't have to.
What they were for.
You didn't have to. It was such a great movie.
Yeah.
it was so predictive of actual things. I mean,
that's right. Like, Taco Bell.
Well, the officers, they all pull up in that row of cars, and they look at their little PDAs, like yell in a commanding voice.
Yeah.
Is that what you guys did?
Yeah.
That's exactly.
Like, if it doesn't work, restate the phrase or else.
Anyway, one of the things that I was curious about, something you mentioned during the pre-show, and we touched on a little bit, is you have your main series, Tigers, and then you have your offshoot, which is the Kara Saga. And there's a specific reason that you set both of those 2 series or 3 series up like that. What was the reasoning behind that, instead of just taking Tigers from beginning to end?
Yeah, for the writers out there, there are a couple of reasons. One is that you get a lot of authors out today that get successful with one series, and when they finish it, they have trouble going ahead and transferring that success to their other series, the ones that they're going to write after that. So I didn't want to fall in that trap, and I wanted to go ahead and build excitement for multiple series as I'm writing the Chronicles series, so that in between books, people that really like my writing can go to the Kara Saga or go to Tales of the Seventh and read that. And with Tales of the Seventh, it was really Steiger's early career with Ellie, so you could get a little Steiger and Ellie between the big Chronicles books, which the last one was 227,000 words. This here is the next book in the Tales of the Seventh series, which was actually finished today and got off to the developmental editor for the second edit. So I'm pretty excited about that. But I want to have 3 or more successful series, so that when I finish the Chronicles series, I can still feed my family. Right?
It's always nice.
It's always good to have food.
Exactly. Exactly. But at the same time, the Chronicles books are so detailed and so involved that, when I finished the Tiger's Time, which was the biggest book I've written, it was like 836 pages. 227,000 words, that to the point where I actually had to cut out a chapter so that it could be printed. I was exhausted and needed a break from Steiger. And it was one of those books where at the end of it, you're left a little battered by what happened. And I wanted to work on a different project at that point, which was the Kara Saga. So what it does at the same time as building success for the other series is that it's a break for me so that I can go back to the next book, which I've already written half of, which is The Tiger's Wrath, and put just as much energy into it and excitement into it and creativity into it as if I'd never stopped writing from book 4. So, you know, it's a nice little break where I'm focused on Karis with Fortress of Radiance, which is an interesting story because it was a departure from what I normally write. It was more of a dungeon crawl than anything else. So that when I was wrapping up Fortress of Radiance, I was like ready to go on The Tiger's Wrath. And I just started cranking it out. It just flowed. If I'd started The Tiger's Wrath right at the end of the Tiger's Time, I was exhausted at that point. And usually between books is when I catch up on TV. You know,
I can't remember
stuff like Vikings. So what's that?
I can't remember if we've asked this before, but I know when I work on multiple projects at the same time, but I also know that I kind of project ahead of time what I'm going to be working on once I'm done with this project. And so I kind of work in different sections where in the morning time or throughout the day, well, now it's all day. I work on my writing projects, and then in the evenings or in the off hours is when I plan my future projects. And so is that something that you kind of do with the 3 series, as you're like jumping back and forth as you're writing your Kara Saga, but then you're planning your Steiger's novels, and then you can kind of just continually jump between?
I'm always thinking on writing. Okay. Yeah. And I'll be in the shower and I'll have a great idea. You know, it's like
It's where all my good stuff
comes. Exactly. I have these wonderful notebooks here. I actually picked these up at Dragon Con. I've got others. And whenever I have an idea, I write it down. I make a point of writing it down. I've got so many stories that I want to tell that I haven't gotten to yet, that I write those down. We'll be like, when we take a trip to Florida, I'll do most of the driving, and we make the road trips. We go visit my wife's family down there and my family. We make it more about what we do along the way than actually getting there. But at the same time, I'm doing a lot of driving and I'm thinking. Everybody will be asleep in the car. Oh, yeah. And I'll be thinking of that. And we will stop, and I'm like, I've got to write it down. We were at Dragon Con last year, and we finished the panel, and I went back to the room, and I was exhausted because I'd had 6 panels that day. And, you know, after the panels, you get to meet people and talk to them. And, you know, Jim Butcher, we've had book signings every year for like the past 2 years together. And, you know, he told me it's like, you know, when he's at home, he's an introvert, but when he goes to the conventions, he has to be an extrovert, and it's exhausting. And I feel the same way. So I went back to the room and I was just exhausted, and an idea hit me for a book. And I just sat down and just started outlining the book right then and there in one of my notebooks. So it's whenever it hits me that I actually start putting down ideas. And when I'm writing a book like the Chronicles or Kara Saga or Tales of the 7th series, I'm always thinking about it. And I've got an outline that I put together. It's usually about 70 to 80 pages long, and it's chapter by chapter. And that way you don't run into writer's block.
Yep.
At the same time, you're thinking about those chapters you've got to write. And you just wrote a chapter, and suddenly it hits you. It's like, wow, wouldn't it be cool if he does this instead of what I had planned? And it just makes the book that much better. It just happens, and it's my wife thinks sometimes I like channel things from a past life. And it's just, you know, I don't buy into it, but she's like, you know, there are days where and you guys probably know this too, where the creativity is just there, and other days where you're exhausted, you're tired, and the creativity isn't there, and it's frustrating to write. I still write in those days. I make a point of writing every day.
Sometimes those days when you have such a hard start, it's kind of like going to the gym. You know, you don't really want to be there, but once you get there, actually sometimes you can do your best work.
Absolutely.
You know, once you break through the seal, or you push through that first little door, and then sometimes you have great stuff. So it's always a good idea to at least give it a try.
Sometimes it is. You don't. I have the saying: you don't try, you don't get, or you don't ask, you don't get. Same
exactly.
thing.
Yeah. I have sometimes in the morning where I'm really, really good in the early morning.
That's the coffee speaking, not the coaching.
It's true. And then I'll get like halfway through the day and I'm like, I don't have any idea what I want to write about, even though I have an outline. And like today it happened too, where I was really good in the morning. I had to take a break to do a couple shows. We had a company meeting. And then from like 1:30 to 3, I'm just basically looking at this. And then at 3 o'clock, my parents leave and my wife gets home and we do a couple things. We start trading off the kids. And then it hits me about 4. I know what I need to write. And so I get to the computer, but by the time I'm getting to my computer now at 4 that I need to write, the kids are screaming and they're running around and I'm like, this is the inspiration time.
I know.
They don't understand that. So
it just happens sometimes. And thankfully my office has a door that I can close. And like I was in the groove today. We had a snow day today. So for the first 2.5 hours, I was out there shoveling our driveway and getting the snowblower out there. I've got like an industrial snowblower, and we got like 8 inches of snow, which isn't much, but I used to live in New Hampshire. And we used to, before we moved into this house, we lived in a little community. Now I've got my own forest back here. It's great. But in the community, when I first moved here, I got this industrial snowblower, and my neighbors, and we had a small driveway. And my neighbors were like, ha, ha, ha. And they had these little like 12-inch snowblowers. And I think you guys live in Kansas City, right? So you guys know.
We live close. We live in Wichita, but it's close. And
it's
close. We had we almost had an inch the other day, and it was like really, really bad. Like just terrible snow.
Oh, well, I used to live in New Hampshire, and the worst I ever had, it was 5.5 feet in one snowstorm, right? I came out of my apartment building in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and the only thing you could see was the top of the outline of my F-150. All the other cars were buried. But guess what? The roads were plowed. But so you know, when it comes to the snowblowers, I take my snowblowers very seriously. It's like the home improvement show that Anyway, so
more power.
Yeah, exactly. And he's looking over the fence like, what are you talking about, Tim?
Exactly. So in my old community, my neighbors were laughing at me, and then we got one storm, just one, with 4 feet of snow. And I opened up the garage, and I was like, oh.
I'll show them.
It was they all borrowed it that day.
I had to put my truck in 4-wheel drive the other day to go through some drifts on our straight, and it was like just like one drift. I was so happy. It's like finally I'm dedicated for having a 4-wheel drive.
I took my F-150 when I was living in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. We got like 3 feet of snow, and I went over to the Fox Run Mall. And the roads in New Hampshire, they wait for that first snowflake to fall. It's not like Pennsylvania where I live today, where they just, they don't know what they're doing when it comes to snow removal. And I was just doing loops with the F-150, spinning around, having a blast at the Fox Run Mall. And suddenly I go ahead and I look over, and there's a state trooper just looking at me. No. And he's just like this. He's like, come over. So I come over, and I roll down my window. We're like the only people on the road.
Yeah.
And he's like, you having fun? And I'm like, I was.
Yeah, actually I am.
Like, I did the same thing about 30 minutes ago.
Yeah. Nice. We had one question in the chat from Bart of Today, and we were talking, you mentioned earlier about writing military sci-fi, and Bart of Today was wondering if you'll use a pen name when you transfer over, when you start to write the mil sci-fi.
No, I've actually got the sci-fi. I've started writing it.
I've seen some of your covers, by the way, or the concept art, maybe.
Yeah, that's the sci-fi project that I'm trying to get to. It's just that I've got so much success and momentum right now in fantasy. It's hard to get the time to do it. And my fans want to find out, you know, what happens to Steiger, what happens to Kara. So it's you know, I don't mind being trapped in there, but I really want to get out a science fiction book because I've got a vision for what I want to do. I'm more of an old style science fiction, going back to like the David Brin, the Heinlein kind of style days. And I've got a vision for a book that I want to write. And over the last 4 or 5 years, I've really spent a lot of time developing it. And there are a number of publishers that are interested in picking it up. And I promised my agent I would get the first 4 chapters written, edited, and perfect for her to go to Book Expo America and really talk to those guys that really want it. And the first 2 chapters are completely written and ready to go. I think it's going to be something that's, for me, it's going to be a little transformational because it's a different style of writing. And I can't wait to bring my vision of the story to my fans because I have a feeling they're going to love it. Like I brought my vision of what fantasy should be to my fans, and it's been successful. So it's still unreal to me, as I've talked about this earlier in the show, that people actually like my writing. And I'm not writing for other people, I'm writing for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the pen name thing when you talk about
But your
science fiction,
Autobots and all that.
well, I mean, yes, but when you look at just writing it, you know, like forget the Autobots, forget the mechanics and the business of Amazon, but you look at just writing and reading. People that read sci-fi also read fantasy, and people that read fantasy also read sci-fi. So it's not really outside the realm of, like, if you were going to write a like Scott always says, some dinosaur erotic action romance fiction, like you'd probably want to use a
harem
pen name.
erotic.
Yeah. But
Although
like
I had a lot of people,
Velociraptor reverse harem T-Rex story, like you're gonna probably want to use a pen name. But going back and forth between fantasy and sci, especially with the military aspect of it, because it's very military sci-fi, very military fantasy. They're very close to the same thing.
They aren't. I actually wrote, with the Tiger's Time, I actually wrote a partial sex scene. And it was the first, I know, I was really concerned about it, actually. And my agent was too. So she gave me a hard time about it. She's like, you got to have this in there. And what I love about my agent is that she tells me what I don't want to hear. Okay. There are a lot of agents out there that tell you what you think you want to hear, but mine tells me, and I appreciate that. But when I wrote it, she's like, not too erotic. And I'm like, so milky white breasts and throbbing appendages are out. And she's like, absolutely.
Yeah.
She's like, you are not a erotica author. And I'm like, okay.
Well, thank you. It's the nicest thing you've ever said to me.
Yes, but quick side story here. My first book, Tigers, won an IPPY award for bronze best fantasy for 2016. My third one won gold, but at the first one, we went to the awards ceremony. It was at the Sky Deck in Chicago on the Sears Tower, and it was really cool. And there were all these other authors there, and I made some really good friends. But everybody was wondering who won for erotica. And everyone was like, who was it? And nobody was saying, kind of thing. And the person that won, and I always remember this, it was her name plus, it was basically, the title of the book was Menage of a Musketeer. Okay.
Very clever.
Her name and Alexandre Dumas. And the motto in the book was all for one and all at once.
Nice.
Somebody, that's very clever.
Yes, but no, I'm not an erotica author, and I hope never to write that.
Yeah. Everybody says, well, that's where you make all your money at. I'm like, yeah.
Some people do.
No.
So you say your next book's coming out 5/1 and then 6/1 and then 7/1 and then for the
7/1 and 9/1. Yeah, so I've got Ellie Tales of the Seventh Part 3, which we may actually rename. Not sure yet. And the reason is I kind of want to save the name of the book for a later story, but I'm not sure yet. So we released Ellie Tales of the Seventh Part 1 on my website for free, one chapter at a time, so that my fans would get a little Steiger in between books. And I started doing that with Steiger Tales of the Seventh Part 1. This is Part 3 now. It's really been wildly successful. And there are people out there that want to wait until it's done. But so that book's coming out 5/1. 6/1, I've got a collaboration project with Quincy Allen called Reclaiming Honor. And it takes place at the same time that the Kara Saga does. It's a totally different series, and it follows dwarves. And it's got this main character, this hero that's just, he's got the world against him. His name's Tobak. And we came up with just an amazing story. And I can't wait for my fans to actually read that series. And I think it's going to become a favorite of theirs. And then The Tiger's Wrath, which is book 5 in Chronicles, comes out 7/1. I'm really shooting for 7/1. It may get pushed back to 8/1. It depends on a lot of different factors, how much time I can actually get into writing it. But the book is good portion done now. And then I've got a science fiction book that may be out 9/1. So we'll see. And then I've got the Kara Saga book 3, which is untitled right now because I can't decide on the name. Will be out November, December.
You bring up actually an interesting question. I know we're over time, but
yeah,
the releasing it on your
this is vacation time for me.
That's right. That's right.
Recharging.
The developmental editor has the book, and now I've got like literally a week where I can just do planning and catch up on TV. Which last night I actually bought CBS streaming so I could watch Discovery.
Star Trek Discovery. Yeah. I've
So
got to actually, that's one of the things I'm like focusing on, like, don't do. Like, I'm like, I've got some time. I could probably play a computer game, or I've got some time. I could probably watch Netflix. And I'm like, no, don't do that.
It's such a time sink. It really is.
It is.
Like, when I finished it, I actually downloaded Civilization 6. And I realized what a time sink it would be, and I returned the game.
Yeah. If you start playing World of Warcraft, Josh, I'm going to come over there and shave half your beard.
Yeah, I can't do that because I'll be stuck on that game. I won't get any writing done. But what I was going to ask was the releasing it on your website. I've thought a lot about this, and so I'm curious about it. I know that first of all, this is the first time I'm going to say this in like 5 episodes. Brandon Sanderson did like the first part of his Words of Radiance. Yeah, take it. Everybody, take a drink. I just said Sanderson.
It's a drinking game.
I'm almost out of cognac, so
yeah, I've got like a little bit left of bullet. I've actually got a whole bottle of bullet, but so he did it on I think Tor did it on Tor's website, where they released a chapter a week for like a month and a half or 3 months or something like that before the book came out.
Yeah,
and of course Brandon Sanderson books are like 300,000 words long, so they released like 25,000 words or 30,000. It was a lot of content that they released.
Yeah,
and so
I just listened to the arithmetist, which is really good.
Yeah, oh yeah. So on the stuff that you're doing with Steiger and release, I saw actually that you were releasing. We just released a new chapter or whatever on your website, and then
there should be the last 2 should be up there right now. So
and I saw on your post you ask, go read it, go see what you think, and then also when it comes out, please go buy it. Do you see any noticeable decrease or increase in sales because of that interact?
No, it makes my agent really nervous when I do that.
Right.
But it makes me nervous a little too. But I've got great readers, and they buy everything that I put out, and thankfully most of them have loved what I've put out. I'm fearing the day when I actually write a book that people hate. But at the same time, you know, it gives people an opportunity to really become beta readers, because what I do is I have comments under for Tales of the Seventh under each chapter, and people put their thoughts down there. And if there's something they don't like, they put it there.
Oh,
and it really helps make the book better, because that book has been released in its entirety. And now it's gone, and it was edited by my developmental editor. Hannah is absolutely phenomenal. If I was single, I would marry her. But but it's
indeed.
but basically, she makes me a better writer than I am, and a lot of people don't understand that when you're a writer, it's a team effort. You know, when my books get done, typically, with the exception of Tales of the Seventh, because Tales of the Seventh get edited chapter by chapter, but it goes to the developmental editor, then it goes to the beta readers. They give me their feedback. Then it goes to the copy editor, and it's this process that the book keeps getting better and better and better. So, and then my agent edits it too. So right now, where we are with Tales of the Seventh is that it's gone back for a second edit, what I call a big picture edit, because Hannah didn't know where the story was going, and I refused to tell her. Okay, because I want. It's just, you know, it's just I'm sadistic. But
I was just gonna say that. I was just gonna say that.
My goal is to surprise my readers, and it's not to be predictable, because I hate books that you read where it's like, okay, it's going here. I know what's going to happen before it happens. My books, I try to surprise my readers. So same thing with my editor. And the climactic chapter, she wrote me back, and I've had a number of beta readers write me back as well. They're like, you horrified me. And it's like, I totally didn't expect it to go here. But it's when it comes to releasing chapter by chapter, like I did with Tales of the Seventh series, I like it. I like doing it this way. You know, I'm sure I don't have everybody buy the book, but enough people buy it to make it worth it while, and enough people support me. You know, it's in a way patronage, and I think you have to ask for it. It's like, if you really enjoyed it, would you support me by buying the book? And thankfully, most of my fans do. And I try to keep, on that series, we try to keep the cost of that book, that series, low, so that, you know, a lot of people can afford it, which is $3.99. Because even though the economy is doing really good, there's still people that are struggling out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but if I read something like that, like chapter by chapter, I would totally buy the book. You know, I would want it. But if you're invested enough to spend your time, because my time is more valuable to me than $3.99. So if I'll spend, you know, 10 hours reading a book, then I will definitely pay $3.99 for it.
Oh, absolutely.
That's just me.
Yeah.
And you might have said this already, but when is the Quincy Allen
6-1?
6-1.
It's called Reclaiming Honor, and
I think it'd be cool to get both of you guys on the show at the same time.
I agree. Why don't we schedule that? He's a really good guy. How this happened was, I think it was Eric Flint or David Weber told me. Somebody told me at one of the conventions that you need to give back, and I was like, "What do you mean?" And it's like, well, you've had success. There are a lot of deserving authors out there. Why don't you partner with one, write a series? It'll help you get an extra book out there. It can widen your audience, and you can help give a leg up to another author. So it made sense to me, and I talked to a number of authors, and I couldn't really find anyone that I got really passionate about, that I wanted to work with. And I'd first run into Quincy at SuperCon. It was the first year they did SuperCon in North Carolina, which is a great show. And then I ran into him at DragonCon. And then I ran into him at DragonCon again. And my wife always goes with me. She's my, she keeps me organized there because there's so much going on. And I was complaining that I hadn't come across an author that I was really passionate about. And she's like, well, what about Quincy? And I thought about it. And I was like, I never even considered him. And then I read one of his books, and it was phenomenal. He writes steampunk primarily. He just came out with his latest book. And I went ahead and I said, I messaged him, and then we started talking. And then it was really a marriage made in heaven. And he read all of my books, just devoured them. And then we started talking about it. And he's like, I really want to write about the dwarves on Tanis during the time of Kara Saga. I said, okay, let's do it. And it was an opportunity to really expand that side of the universe.
Right.
And then we started working on an outline together, and it was like, boom, boom, boom. We came up with all these wonderful ideas. In fact, yesterday we were on the phone talking about book 2, and it's just, there's really great, I hate using this word because it's a business word that I used to hate people using in business meetings. And when I was president of a health insurance company, but it was synergy. There's a lot of synergy there. So I'm using it. I'm getting back at people. You know, in business meetings, you get a lot of people that try to use words to make themselves sound more important.
Yeah.
So
I like doing that in our business meetings.
Hey,
so my buzzwords are like, get me another beer and bring me a protein bar and
bring me another with synergy.
bring me another. Yeah.
Bring me another with synergy.
Yeah. So you know, for me, I feel pretty good because Quincy's a really awesome author, and it's going to expose my fans to his and really help him build his brand. And at the same time, it's going to expand my universe, which my readers really want to see, and they want to know what's going on. So it's fun. And I'm talking with another author right now. Actually, I got done speaking with him tonight, our second or third call, and my agent's going to be speaking with him tomorrow to make sure that she can work with him, or later this week. And if everything's good, I mean, we're going to be working on a series together. So it's
awesome.
just, I really value my agent. Now, a lot of people out there, when a lot of people, I got my agent by accident in a way. Well, not really accident. Yeah, I guess it is. But there are a lot of agents out there that are only in it for themselves. And for the writers out there that are trying to find an agent, it's a wonderful new world today because you don't always need one to get started. You can self-publish your own book. Just make sure you do it right with good editors.
Right.
But what I love about my agent is she's completely invested in my career and my success.
That's
and
cool.
She really feels like she's part of the team. And I've spoken to a number of authors that have agents that they don't feel that way.
Yeah.
So, and as I said earlier, she tells me what I don't want to hear, which is great. And my wife does the same thing, like take out the trash and
get that snowblower out there and clear that driveway.
Yeah.
Do the neighbors while you're at it.
What I love is like the great excuse now is every time my wife tells me to do something, I'm like, can't you see that I'm working? I mean, can't you see?
And she believes
and I don't even have to be working. I just have to sit here and look at the computer. And I'm like, can't you see that I'm working?
Playing a game.
I'm projecting my work onto the computer.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I really would like to get both you guys on the show. I'll look at the schedule. I'll send you an email and we'll work it out because I think that's really cool.
That'd be cool.
As two collaborative authors, Scott and I, who.
Josh, we talked about writing a book together, so
hey, I'm all about it, man. I love collaborations, and there are a lot of authors out there that swear against them. I can't work with anybody. I think working with another author is one of the funnest things about writing because there's so much to the collaborative process that is just you lose when it's hard to explain, right? Like you write by yourself and you write your own novel and you have your own creativity or your own vision and all that. And that's great. But writing with somebody else, especially when you're clicking and having a good time creating, there's a high that you get.
And everyone's a little bit different. Everyone's a little bit different. You do a few really good ones, you have some of the good and bad. You always learn from them.
Right.
And I agree. It can be very fulfilling. And in a learning experience can broaden your
Oh, absolutely.
writing bandwidth.
Yeah, and you know, Quincy, when we were bouncing ideas back and forth, Quincy got me into spiders. Okay, and I hate spiders. I was sitting here.
I can't stand them.
Yeah, I was sitting here the other day, and I got a window pane right here, and I watched the spider walk across the wall and actually squeeze itself under the window pane. And
he said, "I'm coming for you."
Yeah, so it was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe anything living could actually get under there. And as a result, in a way, Quincy has made my writing better, and you're going to see that in this book, Ellie Tales of the Seventh, Part 3.
That's such a tome.
Huh? Well, that was
just a tome. Like it's a huge.
It's not a tome. It's like
it's a tome.
It's 70,000 words. Now the Tiger's Time, 227,000 words. When I printed that book out, it was literally this big. And when Amazon looked at it, I know Amazon, and I did that in 6 months, from beginning to end, from beginning to copy edit. It was 6 months. That was when I went writing full time. And my fans have been asking for a longer book, and it was like, okay, here we go. But yeah, exactly.
Right, exactly.
But you know, the crazy thing is, when Amazon got it, they were like, well, you know, we can't print this. We have to break it up into 2, and you've got to take a chapter out. And I was like, oh
no.
Yeah.
Oh, is there a KDP print that it goes only to a certain?
It's like it depends, because I tried to do an omnibus in a paperback of one, and I had to like really get creative to smash that thing down and be under 850 pages for a trilogy.
Yep, and it's crazy. And when you finish something that size, like, I don't know how I actually write books, right? It's just that plugging away day after day, and somehow it gets done. It's like when you start writing, you've got this great outline. It's like 70, 80 pages long, and it's like climbing a mountain. You know, you start at the beginning, you keep plugging away, and somehow you get finished. And when I finish a book, I look back at it, like I'm looking at this, right? I'm like, how the hell did I write this? It's just one of those things, and it just somehow all comes together, and it's just hard. And when I wrote The Tiger's Time, it was so large. I looked at it after I printed it out, and my wife, I was like, honey, this is my book. She's like, you wrote that? Like, that's what I've been doing for the past 6 months. Like, I think it's time for a beer.
Yeah.
So it's just, I mean, you guys know, you guys write books. It's, I don't know if it's the same for you, but for me, I after I get done, like today, it's like, holy shit, I'm done. I've got a life now. But I look back, it's like, how did I do this? Do you guys have that same feeling?
Oh yeah,
definitely. I mean, you look at it, and even I can imagine even a 200,000 word book, but on a, you know, let's just say an 80,000 word book, you take it in chunks, and you're like, I've got this chunk here, and even after that chunk, you're like, oh man, I finished that chunk. But then you get done with the whole thing, and you're like, holy shit, I can't.
You go back and read it, and you actually start reading it, and you're like, what? I did that?
Yeah, I don't remember writing that part.
That's pretty awesome. I actually kind of like
Let me ask you another question here. This is my turn to turn around.
There you go. Turning the tables.
When I write books, right, I write from beginning to end. I don't go back and edit. Do you do the same thing?
It's different every time for me. But I will. It depends, because I'm so fragmented.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's I like, a lot of times I'll kind of like it's like driving by your headlights. I'll write as far as my headlights can see, and I'll outline kind of ahead of me. Or sometimes if it's feeling good, I'll outline bigger chunks. But a lot of times I have to go back and I'll read, sometimes all the way from the beginning, or listen to it. I'll have my phone read it to me while I'm driving to work, and that helps me get the continuity of the story, so that I don't feel like I miss anything. But I'm not as good of an outliner as like Josh, because I have to do that to get the details. Sometimes
one of the things I do with my outlines is I do kind of what you're saying, but in the outline stage. So I will, like with the most recent book that I finished, which is called Edge of Valor, which is my first solo mill sci-fi book.
When is it published?
That it will be out probably this summer. We just finished the dev edit on it. We're going to line and copy.
Nice.
And then we've already got it under contract with Audible Studios, and we just got to nail down who the narrator is. But this is one of those books that you talk to a writer and you're like, I wrote on that book for 6 years, and like, how did you write a book for 6 years? And I'm like, I did it. But it's what you're saying is I did that basically in the outline phase, where I went through and wrote everything that I needed to happen to make the book actually happen through the outline phase. And then I would get to a point, I'm like, but this would be really cool if this happened. Well, because I was in the outline phase, I could just go put that back here. And so I would bounce back and forth through the outline while I'm outlining. And now I've coined a phrase, and I don't know if I could copyright this or not. I'm snowflaking an outline.
Snowflaking an outline. Explain that.
Well, so you hear the snowflake method. And you have outlining. Well, snowflaking is you have a little bit, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more. So what I do now, especially on the 2 projects that I'm working with, which is the 4th and final Terra Nova book and my ghostwriting project, is I'll have an outline, and then I'll break that outline up chronologically or narratively speaking, and then I'll go through and just fill out just pieces of the outline as I go through. And then as I'm doing that, I'm like, okay, I did this here, which means I have to go do this back here, and I'll go fill out that part again. And then I'll go forward and continue to do that as I'm going through all the way to the end of the book without editing. I'll just make a note, do this, do this, do this, do this. And then when I go to actually draft, I can draft, but I kind of do like I'll get to a point where like, I need a techno thing here. I don't know what's happens here. I just make a note and then continue to draft. And that helps me write faster so I can get the words out. Because when you go back and you look at the notes, you're like, oh, I need a note for this. Okay, that's 5 minutes. But if you're in the drafting mode and you're throwing down words, that's kind of a big hiccup to stop and open up Chrome. And in the morning, I don't have internet, and that's a huge big deal. And so
why don't you have internet in the morning?
Self-induced.
It's a self-induced. I turn it off. I have
really.
Yeah, I have an app that will, because I usually get up about between 4:30 and 4 to start writing, and so I turn the internet off on my computer on my Freedom app, so I have no internet from 4 a.m. to 7 a.m. And I don't have any access to it on my computer. I can't even turn it off. Like it.
So you basically boom, right?
Yeah. So if I get to a part where like I need to research this, I'm like, I need this, and then I keep going, and usually in that time I can get between 2,500 and 3,000 words, depending on.
Now, do you actually type, or do you use, like, I use Dragon software when I'm writing to talk?
I do kind of a back and forth, because I use the Mac, so I use the Mac inherent voice dictation software, but I kind of go back and forth on it. I'll type for a little bit, and I'll dictate for a little bit. Usually I dictate dialogue.
I like to dictate, but I have Dragon for home, and I use it on my Mac, but it doesn't function in my Mac for some reason lately. The last few months it hasn't. And so, but what it makes me go a little bit quicker because I can't go back very much. So I will like this morning I would dictate for like 3 or 4 sentences, and then I would type for 2 sentences. I don't know why, but that's what was happening. So I would type, and then I would talk, and then I'd go back and forth, and it was just kind of a weird schizophrenic process. But it was working great this morning. So
yeah,
who knows?
Yeah. When I write, I like when it's just plain writing. What I do is I write the book from beginning to end based off the outline. I don't go back and edit. So when I'm finished, I have this complete product, and then I go and improve it. And when you're writing it, you're talking it in. You're like, oh, this is so awesome. I just wrote this wonderful scene. And then you go back and look at it to edit, and you're like, this is shit. It is the worst possible thing ever.
It's good. It's good creatively to get through it quicker like that, because I think you get the holistic approach of the story. I know that Stephen King talks about that. If you take too long, you can kill your own project. But I also like to layer. Sometimes I just layer it all. That's why I go back and I write up and I go back and I just layer it on.
Every time you layer it in.
Yeah, and it sometimes it works, and sometimes it just slows your way down. Just you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I had a physical the other day, and the doctor was like, "Are you depressed?" Just ask that in the physical, and I'm like, "Doc, I'm a writer. I'm depressed when I edit my work."
Give me 5 minutes and I'll be on the other end of the spectrum. I'll be on the roller coaster.
So my final question, and this is probably the most important question of the whole interview, is when you talk to, and this is for just my personal selfish edification, for your own purposes, when you talk to people and when they ask you what you do you say I am an author, or do you say I am a full-time writer? I'm really conflicted between the two.
I tell them I'm an author, because a writer means something completely different. Like, you've published a book, right? So that means you've authored a book, so that makes you an author. And yeah, you're a writer, but at the same time you're an author or a novelist, whatever. I've got 8 books out right now in a little over 3.5 years. This year I'm going to have 6 books come out. So yeah, I tell people I'm an author, and they're like, really? What do you write? And it's like, well, I write porn.
I tell everybody I'm
dinosaurs.
My wife, when I say we're at a dinner party or something like that, and people meet me and they're like, "Oh, you're a writer. You're an author. What do you write?" And it's like, "I write porn." And it's like, "What?" My wife looks at me, "You're such an asshole."
You're such an asshole. It's a dinosaur porn.
The running joke at work was the running joke at work when I turned in my notice and I had my last week at work. The running joke was I'm quitting to write pop-up porn that's also scratch and sniff. So it was
nice,
very in-depth, intriguing career move. So,
but at the same time, it's also fascinating. Like, I had a conversation with my wife the other day, and we were talking about, I don't even know how it came up. And she's like, "You're the most normal person I know." And I looked at her and I said, "Honey, I write about dwarves, elves, and dragons." And gnomes.
That's
so anyway.
Speaking of writing,
yeah,
I get
we are. This is first of all, you mentioned David Weber at the beginning. We are on par.
Great gentleman.
We are on par to match one of his longest interviews, but we're not going to make it.
Oh, why not? Let's beat it.
I got to get up at 3 a.m. to write before work.
Oh, I feel free. I know those. The sad thing about like conventions, when you go to the cons and you're on the panel, and I was on a panel, and I told you earlier, there was Janny Wirtz on the panel, Jody Lynn Nye, John Ringo, and David Weber, and you've only got an hour to talk. And there's so many things to talk about that are so fascinating. Like, you're on a military science fiction panel, and for an hour you talk Roman legions with 6,000 people in the room. It's just, and you get really interesting perspectives. So, but David Weber is one of my favorite authors to be on a panel with, and he's a real gentleman. So, and he's written some fantastic stuff.
I love his books. I love his Safehold books, which I need to read again as an older I went from, I don't know if this was a disservice on my end, and after I say this, I'll probably wrap this up. But I went from his Honor Harrington series to a Safehold series, and I was expecting something completely different in his Safehold series than I got. And so when I read it, I was like, this is not what I wanted to read. But now, as an older author, thinking back and thinking about the type of story that it is, it to me now it feels like a more intriguing story. So I probably should go back and read it. That being said, definitely go and read your series,
Tigers, the Kara Saga,
and you better cheer for the Chiefs next season if you're.
Oh, I am totally. The AFC playoff game was much more entertaining.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Let's just pretend the Super Bowl didn't happen.
Yeah, that was the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
No, it's just
everybody in the live chat that hung out with us tonight, thank you guys for coming and hanging out with us live and sharing your thoughts. And my goodness, I mean, I can't scroll back for
there's a lot of activity in the live chat.
A lot of things going on. So Mark, thank you so much for coming back on the show. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark.
Well, we are going to sign off for that. For Scott Moon, I am Josh Hayes. We have been live here on Keystroke Medium. Make sure you come back next time. We're going to talk about some reading. We're going to talk about some writing, and of course, everything in between right here on Keystroke Medium. See ya.